Good evening, dear friends, and a very warm welcome to each and every one of you, wherever you're listening from tonight. Maybe tucked safely under the blankets, curled up in your favorite quiet corner of the house, or perhaps lying somewhere peaceful while the world slowly quiets down outside. I'm so happy you're here with me. Take a slow, gentle breath in. Let your shoulders soften and drop. Maybe pull the blanket or duvet up just a little higher and allow the day to quietly drift away. London fog lay thick upon the city that autumn evening. At 221 B. Baker Street, Holmes sat idle, craving challenge. Then came the urgent knock at the door. Sir Reginald Blackwood, a prominent banker, was found dead at the Thames Embankment. His throat was torn out in a manner suggesting a savage beast or ghoul, and the body appearing strangely drained of blood. Scotland Yard saw the work of a madman or some supernatural entity. But Holmes saw a link, the peculiar greenish mud on the victim's boots, not typical of the embankment, one link in a chain that would bind a killer. The game is afoot. Chapter 1. The first link. I set down these events as they occurred, dear reader, in the autumn of 1895, when the thick London fog wrapped the city in a damp, choking veil. At 221 B. Baker Street, Sherlock Holmes had spent days in restless idleness, the coal fire burning low while he plucked absently at his Stradivarius violin. The bitter scent of his strong tobacco blended with the lingering warmth of Mrs. Hudson's scones from earlier tea, and I sat in my armchair, the rough tweed of my jacket brushing my arms as I turned damp pages of the evening newspaper. A sharp knock echoed up the 17 steps at 9:30. Mrs. Hudson's soft voice followed. "Mr. Holmes, Inspector Lestrade is here. Most urgent," he says. Holmes set the violin down with a sigh of anticipation, his eyes gleaming under the gaslight. "Show him in, Mrs. Hudson, and bring strong bitter coffee if you would." Lestrade entered, bowler hat, dripping fog, heavy coat, carrying the cold smell of Thames mud and coal smoke. His boots left wet prints on the carpet as he spoke quickly. "Bad business, Holmes. Sir Reginald Blackwood, the banker, found an hour ago on the embankment near Cleopatra's Needle, throat torn open like a beast attacked him, body drained pale, hardly any blood on the stones. The papers will scream Ghoul of the Thames by morning." I rose, chair leather creaking. Holmes stayed seated, his fingers steepled under his chin. "Every detail, Lestrade. Omit nothing." The inspector paced before the crackling fire. "Night watchman found him at 9:10. Fog thick as soup, no witnesses. Watch and chain still on him, but wallet gone. Oddly, a sovereign left inside the lining. Wound ragged, not cut clean. Blood mostly missing, as if drained away." Holmes's lips curved faintly. "And the mud on his boots." Lestrade blinked. "Mud? He was by the river. Natural, surely." "Natural is the lazy man's explanation. Watson, my coat. We go at once." The hansom cab rattled through swirling fog, wheels grinding cold cobblestones, driver's lantern throwing weak yellow light. Bitter damp air seeped under my collar, chilling my face. Big Ben tolled 10 in the distance. Fog horns moaned low over the Thames, and the smell grew stronger. Brackish river mud, rotting weeds, sharp coal smoke from passing barges. At the embankment, police lanterns glowed through mist. Sir Reginald lay on wet stones, in evening dress, white shirt front soaked crimson. Throat wound, savage and torn, yet face oddly peaceful. Greenish mud clung to his polished boots, catching lantern light strangely. Holmes knelt immediately, long fingers hovering over the mud. Rough stone pressed his knees through trousers as he took out his lens, cold metal warming in his palm. "The first link, Watson," he murmured. "This greenish mud, flecked with white chalk and faint metallic sheen, not embankment silt, which is black, heavy, sewage-laden. This is lighter, clayish, smelling faintly of carbolic disinfectant and spent gunpowder." I bent closer. damp newspaper brushing my sleeve. And the odour was subtle but clear, sharp disinfectant mixed with acrid powder. Lestrade snorted. Gunpowder on a banker. You stretch too far, Holmes. Holmes rose, brushing grit from knees, eyes bright. Do I? Look at the wound. With forceps, he parted torn flesh gently. Gaslight flickered, shadows dancing. No arterial spray on stones. Blood largely removed after death. Someone cleaned the scene. And here, tiny dark wool fibres in the wound, coarse, tar-stained. Cold fog pressed my face, dampness sinking into bones. Distant cab wheels faded, leaving only Thames lapping and a lantern hiss. Holmes stood tall. The link. Greenish mud with carbolic, gunpowder traces. Chalk. The forge. Only one London spot matches. Abandoned gunpowder works and lime kiln sheds at Limehouse, contaminated since the 1882 explosion, cleaned with carbolic. And the chain. Recall the Red-Headed League, where boot clay, traces from one tunnel, destroyed a perfect alibi and exposed the tunnellers. Earth remembers footsteps, Watson, just as here. The bind. Sir Reginald was not strolling the embankment. He visited Limehouse sheds tonight. His death ties there. The first link forges. Did you spot it before I spoke? I admit I had not. The link stayed hidden until Holmes connected it. What chain would you build from that single patch of mud? We rode back in quiet, cab-splashing puddles, reflecting gas lamps. Mrs. Hudson left hot tea and brandy by the fire. Room smelled of warm leather, pipe tobacco, faint, sweet brandy. Holmes filled his pipe from the Persian slipper, pacing before dancing flames that lit scattered chemical bottles. Data, data, he said softly. Mud, fibres, odd wallet. Suspects will appear. 5 at least. Already the chain forms. I sipped hot tea, warmth spreading through cold fingers. Mantel clock ticked steadily against muffled fog outside. Holmes drew on his pipe, smoke curling upward. Looking back, I should have seen the mud secret. Watson missed it. Did you? Fire crackled, coal smoke blending with tobacco. A lone foghorn moaned far off. The first link forged, Holmes murmured at last. The chain begins. Chapter 2. Forging Connections. I continue these notes from the quiet of our sitting room at 221B Baker Street, where the coal fire still glowed softly and the fog outside pressed against the windows like a living thing. The events of the previous night had left me restless, yet Holmes appeared energized, moving about with that quick, feline grace he reserved for the early stages of a chase. The air carried the familiar mix of pipe tobacco, warm leather from our chairs, and the faint, damp newspaper smell that clung to everything after a night in the fog. By 8:30, the next morning, we were already in a hansom, the horses' hooves clattering steadily on wet cobblestones as we made for Limehouse. The bitter cold bit at my ears, despite the scarf I had wound tight. Big Ben struck the hour in the distance, its deep tone muffled by mist, while the low moan of river foghorns drifted up from the Thames. Our first stop was the derelict gunpowder works, a cluster of crumbling brick sheds near the old lime kilns. The gate hung crooked on rusted hinges. The smell of carbolic disinfectant hung heavy, mixed with the sour tang of old coal dust and river mud. Holmes pushed the gate open with a creak of iron, his boots crunching on broken glass and chalky white powder that still dusted the ground. Inside the largest shed, moonlight-thin daylight filtered through cracked skylights. Holmes knelt beside a pile of discarded sacking. Observe, Watson. Fresh boot prints, size 11, narrow toe, left heel worn on the outer edge, the same pattern as Sir Reginald's boots last night. I crouched, feeling the cold, rough concrete through my trouser knees. And these greenish stains on the floor, exactly the mud we saw. Precisely, the first connection forged. He rose, eyes gleaming. Now, let us speak with the night watchman who patrols these yards. We found old Jem Crouch in a tiny brick hut at the yard's edge, hunched over a brazier that gave off the sharp smell of burning coke. His hands, rough and cracked, cradled a tin mug of bitter tea. He eyed us warily under bushy grey brows. "Police already been," he grumbled, voice like gravel. "Told 'em I saw nowt." Holmes drew out a sovereign and placed it carefully on the upturned crate that served as a table. "Yet you patrol these sheds every night, Mr. Crouch." A gentleman in evening dress would stand out. The old man's eyes flicked to the coin, then back. "I saw him round 7:30. Tall fella, top hat, walking quick like he knew where he was going. Went straight into the big shed. Heard voices, 2 men at least, one angry. Didn't stay to listen, not my place." "Did you see the second man leave?" Holmes asked softly. Crouch shook his head. "Fog came down thick after that. I kept to my hut. Heard a carriage later. Handsome, I reckon. Wheels on the cobbles outside." Holmes nodded. "Then the link. A gentleman entered these sheds at 7:30. The forge. Sir Reginald wore evening dress and carried no overcoat, implying a short journey or awaiting conveyance. The chain. In the Milverton case, a gentleman's hurried visit to a blackmailer's house at dusk, followed by the sound of departing wheels, collapsed his alibi of being at his club. Footsteps and carriage sounds betrayed movement. The criminal thought didn't. Here, too, the ground and the night watchman. Remember. The bind, Sir Reginald, met someone here. Someone furious enough for murder. Did you catch that second voice in your mind before I asked Watson?" I had not. The listener might have already linked the angry voices to the torn throat. We thanked Crouch and took another cab to the second address, Sir Reginald's Mayfair townhouse in Grosvenor Square. The butler, M. Meadows, received us in the hall, the air rich with furniture polish, coal smoke from the library fire, and the faint sweetness of late roses in a vase. "Sir Reginald dined at home last night," Meadows said in measured tones. "Left at 7:15 in a hansom he summoned himself. Said he had urgent business by the river. Returned, no, sir. We expected him back by 11. Holmes paced the turkey carpet, fingers steepled. "Did he receive any letters or telegrams yesterday afternoon?" "One telegram, sir. Delivered at 4. He read it in the library, grew agitated, then burned it in the grate." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "The grate still has ashes." Meadows led us to the library. The fire had been cleared, but Holmes knelt and sifted the cold ash with forceps. Tiny scraps remained, fragments of blue paper, in the distinctive colour of the Eastern Telegraph Company. "Beat, warehouse, midnight, do not fail." Holmes read aloud from the largest piece. "Enough remains to show urgency. The telegram summoned him to Limehouse." We left Mayfair and rattled east again. This time to a small shipping office near the West India Docks. There we interviewed Mr. Elias Thorne, Sir Reginald's junior partner, a thin, nervous man with ink-stained fingers and the smell of cheap carbolic soap about him. Reginald was worried these past weeks, Thorne admitted, voice trembling slightly. Something about a bad investment in nitrates from Chile. He spoke of meeting a man who could set matters right. I begged him not to go alone. "Did he name this man?" Holmes asked. Thorne shook his head. "Only said the fellow had dangerous friends. And there was a woman. Someone he met at the opera last month. Dark hair, foreign accent. He called her my little problem. Once, laughing. But his eyes were not laughing." Holmes drew thoughtfully on his pipe, the strong tobacco smoke curling in the small office. "A woman? Another link. Our final call, before dusk, was to a narrow alley off the Ratcliffe Highway, where a certain Madame Zara, a fortune-teller known to dabble in discreet messages, kept rooms above a chandler's shop. The stairs creaked under our feet, the air smelled of incense, cheap perfume, stale coffee, and the ever-present Thames, damp. Madame Zara received us in a dim parlour, lit by a single gas jet. Her dark eyes flicked over Holmes with wary recognition. "You come about the banker," she said before we spoke. "I warned him. The cards showed blood and water. He laughed. He said he had no choice." "Did he mention a name?" Holmes asked quietly. She hesitated, then nodded once. "Victor Kovalenko. A Pole. Exiles call him the Wolf. Deals in nitrates, gunpowder, anything that burns. Sir Reginald owed him a great deal. More than money. Honour, blackmail, something about papers." Holmes placed a half-sovereign on the table. "Where does Kovalenko live?" "Wapping. Old warehouse near the stairs. But beware, he keeps company with rough men." We descended the creaking stairs into the gathering fog. Handsome wheels splashed past. A distant ship's bell clanged. Holmes walked in silence for several minutes, then spoke. "Links multiply, Watson. The telegram, the angry meeting, the woman, the debt, the wolf. 5 suspects. Now circle the chain. The unknown second man at Limehouse, Thorne, the nervous partner, and the dark-haired foreign woman, Kovalenko the creditor, and perhaps one more yet, unseen." I felt the cold cobblestones through my boots, the fog damp on my face. "And the greenish mud ties them all to Limehouse." "Exactly. The chain takes shape, stronger with every step." We returned to Baker Street as gas lamps flared one by one along the streets. Mrs. Hudson had kept the fire bright. The room smelled of hot tea, sweet brandy, and Holmes's tobacco. He stood before the mantel, filling his pipe from the Persian slipper. Looking back, the connections were forming even then. Watson missed several. "Did you spot how the burned telegram linked to the angry voices? What chain would you forge from a nervous partner, a fortune-teller's warning, and a man called the Wolf?" The fire crackled gently. Outside, rain began to tap the window panes. "Links forging," Holmes said softly, smoke rising. "The chain takes shape." Chapter 3. The chain grows. I resume these recollections from the fog-bound morning of the following day, when the chill of the previous night still clung to the very walls of 221B Baker Street. The coal fire burned steadily, sending out waves of comforting warmth that battled the damp, seeping through the window frames. Holmes had risen before dawn. I found him already dressed, standing at the window with his pipe in hand, watching the gas lamps flicker out one by one as the grey light strengthened. The room smelled of fresh, strong coffee, bitter on the tongue, mixed with the sweet residue of last night's brandy and the ever-present aroma of his tobacco. "Watson," he said without turning, "we return to the Embankment. The police will have trampled much." But something was overlooked in the dark. We took a hansom through streets still wet from overnight rain. The wheels hissed on slick cobblestones. The horse's breath steamed in the cold air. Big Ben struck 9 as we passed Westminster, its notes deep and solemn through the thinning fog. The Thames smell grew stronger. Mud, tar, coal smoke from barges, with every turn toward the river. At the Embankment, the scene had been cordoned with rough rope. A young constable stood guard, stamping his feet against the cold. Holmes showed his card. We were permitted to approach the spot where Sir Reginald had lain. The stones still bore faint, dark stains, now mostly washed by rain, but Holmes knelt at once, running long fingers lightly over the granite. "Here," he murmured, a small brass button, half buried between 2 slabs, and note the engraving, 2 crossed rifles above the letter K. I bent beside him, the rough, cold stone pressing through my knees. The button was heavy, military in style, the brass dulled but not corroded. "Polish military," Holmes said. "From the old Congress Kingdom regiments, Kovalenko's countrymen favor such relics. But see, the thread still attached is dark wool, tar-stained, the same as the fibers in the wound." We moved along the river wall. Holmes paused at a low iron ring, bolted into the stone, used for mooring small boats. Fresh scratches marred the metal, bright against the rust. "Someone tied up here recently," he observed. "The rope was coarse hemp. Fragments remain, and look, more greenish mud, smeared along the wall as though a boot slipped while climbing out." I felt the damp chill rise from the river, immingling with the sharp tang of gunpowder residue that still clung faintly to the air near the stains. Holmes produced his lens again, examining the scratches. "The link, brass button, with crossed rifles and K, plus matching tarred wool. The forge. Such buttons are uncommon in London, save among Polish émigrés and their associates. Combined with the tarred fibers from the throat wound, they point to one man, Victor Kovalenko. The chain. Recall the adventure of the 6 Napoleons, where a single broken bust fragment, bearing a maker's mark, led us through 5 identical pieces to the hiding place of the Borgia pearl. One small overlooked object, a chip of plaster, unraveled an entire conspiracy because the criminal could not resist keeping his treasures close. Here, too, a single button, dropped in haste during the struggle or the clean-up. She betrays the hand that tore the throat. The ground and the water's edge remember what men forget in panic. The bind, Kovalenko, or one in his employ, was here at the moment of death. The chain grows stronger. Did you feel it tighten when the button appeared, Watson? Or did the crossed rifles remain invisible until I spoke? I confess the significance escaped me until he laid the links side by side. What chain would you have forged from a single military button half buried in stone? Holmes pocketed the button carefully. We walked a short distance to where the embankment met a narrow flight of steps leading down to the water. At the bottom, half submerged at low tide, lay a sodden black overcoat, its lining torn. Holmes descended the slippery steps, balancing with one hand on the cold iron rail. "Sir Reginald's," he called up. "Initials RB. Embroidered inside the collar, and here, inside the breast pocket, a crumpled sheet. Waterproof notepaper. Ink much run, but enough remains." He passed it up to me. Through the blurred ink, I could make out fragments. "Warehouse. Nitrates. Payment due. Midnight. Do not bring police, or the bargain ends." "The same hand as the telegram scraps," Holmes said, climbing back. "Kovalenko summoned him here after the Limehouse meeting went sour. The midnight appointment was a trap." We returned to Baker Street by early afternoon. The fire had been built high. Mrs. Hudson brought fresh tea, its steam carrying the comforting scent of bergamot. Holmes spread his notes on the table amid the chemical apparatus, the violin resting nearby. 5 suspects, now clearly defined, he said, pacing before the hearth. First, Victor Kovalenko, the wolf, creditor, supplier of illicit nitrates, owner of tarred coats and Polish buttons. Second, the unknown second man at Limehouse, whose voice old Crouch heard, raised in anger. Third, Mr. Elias Thorne, the junior partner who knew too much and trembled too much. Fourth, the dark-haired foreign woman from the opera. "My little problem," Sir Reginald called her. Fifth, possibly an agent or hired rough from Kovalenko's circle. He stopped, fingers steepled under his chin. Yet the chain lengthens. The overcoat was not taken as a trophy. It was discarded because it became dangerous evidence. Someone feared its discovery. I sipped the hot tea, feeling its warmth chase the river chill from my hands. Outside, rain pattered steadily against the panes. Inside, the coal fire snapped and hissed. Looking back, the button was the crucial link that day. Imp Watson missed how the military mark connected directly to the pole. Did you see the chain extend when the sodden coat rose from the tide? Before Holmes explains further, what does this new evidence tell you? Holmes drew thoughtfully on his pipe, smoke curling toward the ceiling in slow spirals. The clock ticked, The foghorns moaned distantly over the river. "The chain grows stronger," he said at last, voice low and certain. "Logic binds." Chapter 4. Testing the Links. I take up the thread once more. From the late afternoon of that third day, when the fog had lifted enough to let pale sunlight filter through the grimy windows of 221 B. Baker Street. The coal fire burned steadily, its warmth pushing back the lingering chill that had settled into my bones from too many hours by the river. Holmes had spread maps, notes, and small evidence packets across the table. The air carried the mingled scents of strong tobacco, hot ink from fresh written telegrams, worn leather bindings, and the faint carbolic trace that still clung to the button we had recovered. "We test the chain now, Watson," Holmes said, pacing rapidly before the hearth. "Weak links will shatter under pressure, strong ones will hold." Our first test came at Scotland Yard. Inspector Lestrade met us in his cramped office, the room smelling of old files, coal smoke, and the sharp bite of carbolic from a nearby sink. He looked weary, sleeves rolled up, a half-smoked cigar smouldering in the ashtray. "Holmes, if you've come to tell me it's a ghoul again, save your breath," he began. "We've got a witness now." A lighterman saw a tall man in a black overcoat arguing with Blackwood near the Needle just before 9. Description: matches your poll. Kovalenko. Holmes leaned forward, fingers steepled. The witness's name? Jonas Pike. Moored his barge 50 yards off. Swears he heard raised voices, something about nitrates and payment. Then a scuffle. Didn't see the actual blow. Fog too thick, but he rowed closer after and saw the body fall. I felt the rough texture of the wooden chair against my back. "And the overcoat we found in the water?" Lestrade shrugged. "Could be coincidence. Pike says the man wore one just like it." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Send for Pike. We shall test this link." Half an hour later, Jonas Pike stood before us, broad-shouldered, red-faced from river wind, smelling of tar and fish. His boots left faint, wet prints on the floorboards. "Describe the overcoat again," Holmes said quietly. "Black wool, heavy, brass buttons, one missing on the left cuff." I noticed when he raised his arm to strike. Holmes produced the button we had found. "Like this," Pike peered, then nodded vigorously. "Aye, same pattern. Crossed rifles, fell off during the row, most like." Holmes pocketed it again. "You're certain of the time?" 9:15. Heard Big Ben clear as anything." We left the yard. "In the hansom," Holmes murmured. "The first weak link cracks. Kovalenko's coat, yes, but he is tall and broad. The button fell from a cuff raised to strike. Yet Sir Reginald's throat was torn low. From behind or the side, a blow from above would not match. Pike lies, or saw only part." Our second test took us to Wapping, aimed to the old warehouse near the river stairs that Madame Zara had named. The building loomed dark against the late light, windows boarded, the air thick with river mud, coal dust, and the sour reek of nitrates. Holmes knocked. After a long pause, the door creaked open. A squat man with a scarred cheek blocked the way. "No visitors." Holmes smiled thinly. "Tell Mr. Kovalenko that Sherlock Holmes wishes to return a button." The man hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside, the warehouse smelled of damp wood, gunpowder residue, and cheap spirits. Victor Kovalenko waited at a rough table, a tall Pole with cold grey eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. His coat, black wool, brass buttons, hung on a peg nearby. One cuff lacked its button. "You have something of mine?" he asked, voice low and accented. Holmes held out the button. "Found on the embankment. Matches your coat. And your military past." Kovalenko's jaw tightened. "I was there. Business with Blackwood. He owed me. Large sum. We argued. He struck first. I defended, but I did not kill him. I left him alive." breathing hard. Someone else came after. Holmes paced slowly. You left your coat behind? No, I took it. This is another. I own 3 identical, old regiment issue. I watched Kovalenko's hands. Steady, no tremor. The tar smell on the coat was fresh. Holmes nodded once. We shall see. Third test. Elias Thorne's office near the docks. The junior partner received us nervously, ink still wet on his fingers, the room smelling of cheap carbolic soap and nervous sweat. You knew of the meeting at Limehouse? Holmes asked. Thorne swallowed. Yes. Reginald told me. Said it was to settle the nitrate debt. I urged caution. Did you follow him? No. I was at home. My housekeeper can swear. Holmes produced a telegram form. This was sent from your office at 7:30 that evening. Do not fail. Midnight. Bring no one. Unsigned. But your handwriting. Thorne paled. I sent it on his instruction, to ensure privacy. The lie weakens, Holmes said softly. You feared exposure. 4th rapid call. The Opera House box office, in Covent Garden. The clerk remembered Sir Reginald well. He came often with a lady. Dark hair, foreign accent, always in black velvet. Last month, she left angry after an argument in the corridor. He called her Isabella. 5th, a quick visit to a pawnbroker in Whitechapel, known for handling stolen goods. The owner, a small man with thick spectacles, examined a photograph of Sir Reginald's watch chain. Pawned 2 days before death by a woman, dark, pretty, foreign, gave name Isabella Moreau. Took £20. Holmes's eyes narrowed. The woman link strengthens. We returned to Baker Street as dusk fell. Gas lamps flared along the streets. Rain began again, tapping the windows. The fire crackled warmly. Holmes stood before it, pipe in hand, smoke curling upward. 5 tests, Watson. Pike's story cracks. Time and wound angle do not match a frontal strike. Kovalenko admits presence but denies the kill. His coat story holds for now. Thorne's telegram betrays complicity or fear. The woman, Isabella, pawns the chain. Motive of jealousy or money. The 5th shadow, still unseen. I sipped hot tea, its warmth chasing the day's chill. The leather armchair creaked under me. Outside, hansom wheels splashed past. Looking back, several links bent under pressure. Watson missed how the missing cuff button almost bound Kovalenko, until the identical coats appeared. Did you spot the weak link in Pike's tail before Holmes tested the angle of the wound? What chain would you discard after these trials? Holmes drew on his pipe thoughtfully. Weak link shattered. The true chain emerges. Chapter 5. The chain tightens. I pick up the narrative from the evening of that 4th day, when the rain had eased into a fine, persistent mist that turned every gas lamp into a soft halo along Baker Street. The sitting room at 221B felt unusually close. The coal fire snapped brightly, throwing warmth across the worn leather chairs and the scattered papers on the table. Holmes had been silent for nearly an hour, standing motionless before the mantel with his pipe unlit. In eyes fixed on some invisible point in the middle distance, the air held the familiar blend of strong tobacco waiting to be kindled, damp wool from our overcoats drying by the door, and the faint, sweet trace of Mrs. Hudson's evening brandy left in 2 glasses. At length he spoke, voice low. The chain tightens tonight, Watson. We go to Wapping, Kovalenko's warehouse. If he is innocent of the kill, he knows who is not. We descended the 17 steps into the wet night. A hansom waited. The horse stamped impatiently, breath steaming. The cab rattled east through darkening streets, wheels splashing through shallow puddles that reflected flickering gaslight. Big Ben tolled 10 as we crossed the river. Foghorns answered from the water, low and mournful. The smell of the Thames grew thick, brackish mud, tar from ropes, a coal smoke, drifting off anchored barges. We alighted near the old stairs. The warehouse loomed black against the mist, a single lantern burning dimly above the door. Holmes moved forward, silently. I followed, hand near the revolver in my pocket. The cold iron of the door handle bit my palm as he tried it. Unlocked. Inside, the vast space smelled of nitrates, old gunpowder, damp timber, and something sharper. Fresh blood. A single candle burned on a crate. Shadows danced across stacked barrels. In the center of the floor lay Victor Kovalenko, face down, throat torn in the same savage manner as Sir Reginald's. His black coat was flung aside, one brass button missing from the cuff. Holmes knelt swiftly beside the body. Dead less than an hour. The wound matches. Ragged. Low from behind. No arterial spray on the floor. It's someone cleaned again. I felt the chill rise from the stone flags through my boots. The same hand? Or the same method? Look here. Holmes pointed to Kovalenko's clenched right hand. Between rigid fingers protruded a small scrap of dark velvet, torn from a lady's cloak or dress. Nearby lay a woman's kid glove, black, one finger ripped. The woman, I breathed. Isabella. Holmes rose. We pursue her now. Thorne mentioned she argued with Sir Reginald at the opera. The pawnbroker saw her pawn the watch chain. She links them both. We left the warehouse at speed, hailing a passing cab. Holmes directed the driver to a narrow court off Drury Lane, where theatrical lodgings clustered. The streets here smelled of grease paint, cheap perfume, wet sawdust from stage doors, and the ever-present coal smoke. Rain began again, tapping the cab roof like impatient fingers. At number 17, a small brass plate read, Mrs. Isabella Moreau, dramatic artiste. Holmes knocked sharply. After a pause, the door opened a crack. A dark-haired woman peered out, eyes wide with alarm. She wore a black velvet cloak, one shoulder torn where a piece was missing. Mademoiselle Moreau, Holmes said calmly, we come from Victor Kovalenko. He is dead. You were seen leaving his warehouse tonight. She tried to close the door. Holmes's foot prevented it. You will speak with us here, or with Scotland Yard in an hour. Isabella stepped back, trembling. The tiny parlour smelled of lavender water, stale coffee, and fierce wet. A small fire crackled. She sank into a chair, hands twisting in her lap. I loved Reginald, she whispered, accent soft but distinct. French, perhaps. He promised marriage. Then he said the debt to Kovalenko made it impossible. He would sell secrets, nitrates for explosives, to pay. I begged him not to. When he went to Limehouse, I followed. I saw them argue. Reginald struck Kovalenko. I ran away. And tonight, Holmes asked, I returned to plead again. Kovalenko laughed, said Reginald was already dead, that the debt died with him. I grew angry. We struggled. He grabbed my cloak. I pushed him. He fell against a crate. There was a hook, old iron. It caught his throat. I did not mean... Her voice broke. Holmes's eyes never left her face. Yet the wound matches Sir Reginald's, torn, not hooked, and the blood was cleaned both times, carefully. She shook her head, violently. I ran. I cleaned nothing. Someone else was there, watching from the shadows, tall, hooded. See, I heard footsteps after I fled. Holmes paced the small room, fingers steepled. The link, velvet scrap in Kovalenko's hand, matching your torn cloak. The forge, you admit presence and struggle, yet deny the kill. The wound, however, shows deliberate tearing, not an accidental fall against a hook. The chain, in the case of the speckled band, a woman's terror and a staged death, masked the true murderer's hand until the smallest detail, the whistle in the night, revealed the stepfather's crime. Here, too, emotion clouds truth. A woman's fear and a lover's betrayal point the finger, but the method, consistent savagery, careful cleaning, speaks of calculation, not panic. The bind. You struck in anger, perhaps, but did not tear the throat. Another watched, waited, finished the work. The chain tightens around a third party. Did you sense the shadow in the warehouse before I mentioned it, Watson? Or did the velvet scrap blind you to the unseen watcher? I had felt only the woman's guilt until that moment. The listener may have already suspected a deeper hand. We left Isabella under promise to remain. Holmes wired Lestrade to watch her lodgings. Back in the hansom, rain drumming harder now, Holmes sat silent, eyes gleaming in the dark. 3 suspects fall away, he said at last. Kovalenko dead, Isabella implicated, but not the killer. Thorn's fear genuine, not murderous. The second man at Limehouse, the hooded watcher, our quarry now. The cab splashed through puddles. Distant foghorns answered the rain. We reached Baker Street, soaked but alert. Mrs. Hudson had kept the fire high. The room smelled of hot tea, sweet brandy, pipe tobacco just kindled. Mayor Holmes stood before the flames, drawing on his pipe. No escape now. The chain tightens. Chapter 6. Links to the past. I set these lines down by the dying light of the fire in our sitting room at 221B Baker Street on the morning after that violent night in Wapping. Rain still tapped softly against the window panes. The coal had burned low during the small hours, leaving a faint warmth that smelled of spent embers, old tobacco, and the damp wool of coats hung to dry. Holmes had not slept. I found him at the table surrounded by yellowed newspaper clippings, police reports, and a small stack of letters tied with faded ribbon. His pipe lay cold beside him, the Persian slipper open but untouched. The past holds the key, Watson, he said, without preamble. Every criminal carries history, like a shadow. We must trace the shadow back to its source. Our first step was Scotland Yard's records room, a dim basement, smelling of mildew, old ink, coal dust from the furnace pipes, and the sharp tang of carbolic used to keep the damp at bay. Lestrade met us there, sleeves rolled, a ledger open before him. Kovalenko's file, he said, sliding a thin folder across the scarred table. Arrived in London 8 years ago, 1887. Political exile from Warsaw after the failed rising, brought letters of introduction and a talent for moving goods no one else would touch. Nitrates mostly, never caught red-handed. Holmes turned the pages slowly, fingers tracing faded ink. And, before Warsaw, Prussian service, Congress Kingdom artillery, discharged after a powder mill explosion in 1882, same year as the Limehouse blast here. He lost 3 fingers on the left hand. See the surgeon's note. I leaned closer. The cold metal of the table edge pressed my forearms. A sketch showed the mangled hand, and beside it a report. Patient claims faulty fuse. Suspected sabotage by rival contractor. No proof? Holmes's eyes gleamed. The same explosion that left the greenish mud contaminated with carbolic and chalk. Kovalenko was there. Or knew who was. We left the yard and took a hansom to a quiet house in Hampstead, home of Professor Julian Hargreaves, retired chemist who once consulted for the Home Office on explosives. The professor received us in a book-lined study, smelling of old paper, pipe tobacco very like Holmes's own, and the faint sweetness of brandy from a decanter on the sideboard. His hands trembled slightly as he poured us tea, hot, strong, bitter on the tongue. Kovalenko, Hargreaves said, settling into a worn leather chair that creaked under him. Yes, I remember the Limehouse disaster. Faulty batch of powder. Someone substituted inferior Chilean nitrates. The blast killed 12. Inquiry hushed up. Too many important names involved. Blackwood's bank financed the shipment. Holmes leaned forward. And the sabotage? Whispers pointed to a rival. Polish émigré circle. Kovalenko lost fingers and reputation, swore revenge on the men who profited. Blackwood was one. He took commissions quietly. Never proved. The professor paused, staring into the fire. There was another name. A woman, his sister, Isabella Kovalenko. She came to England with him, changed her name to Moreau when she went on the stage. Beautiful voice. Tragic story. Holmes sat very still. Sister? Half-sister. Same father. She blamed Blackwood too. Said he knew the powder was bad, but shipped it anyway for the fee. We returned to Baker Street in silence. The cab wheels ground over wet cobblestones. Distant foghorns moaned across the river. Inside, Holmes spread the clippings before the fire. The room smelled of fresh kindling, warm leather, and the strong tobacco he now lit at last. "Motive clear at last," he said softly. "Not money alone. Revenge for the dead at Limehouse. Kovalenko sought payment in blood. Isabella sought justice for her brother, but someone used them both." He tapped a small photograph clipped from an old program. Isabella Moreau, in costume, dark eyes intense. She tore Reginald's throat, in passion perhaps, but the careful cleaning, the identical method on Kovalenko, calculated, professional. I felt the rough tweed of my sleeve brush my wrist as I reached for my tea. Then who? The second man at Limehouse. The hooded watcher Isabella glimpsed, someone who knew both victims' secrets, someone who profited from the old explosion and feared exposure now. Holmes rose and paced before the hearth, flames casting long shadows. All links connect here. The greenish mud from Limehouse, the military button from Kovalenko's old regiment, the tarred wool fibers, the burned telegram summoning Reginald, the pawnbroker's record of Isabella selling the chain, the velvet scrap in Kovalenko's hand, past and present. One chain. He stopped, drawing thoughtfully on his pipe. Smoke curled slowly toward the ceiling. "In the case of the dancing men," he continued, "a cipher from years before revealed a murderer who had waited decades for revenge, a single old letter linked past crime to present death. Here, too, the ground of Limehouse, the scars of 1882, the family ties, all speak across time. The criminal did not forget. He merely waited until the chain could be pulled tight." I sipped the cooling tea, its bitterness sharp against my tongue. Outside, rain pattered steadily. Inside, the clock ticked in quiet rhythm with the fire's crackle. Looking back, the motive had been hiding in plain sight. Watson missed how the explosion tied brother and sister to banker and creditor alike. Did you see the shadow of 1882 stretching to the embankment? Before Holmes names the final link, what does this history tell you about the hooded watcher? Holmes set his pipe aside and stood before the window, and watching rain streak the glass, past and present, one unbroken chain. Chapter 7. The complete chain. I commit these final revelations to paper in the quiet hours before dawn at 221B Baker Street. The coal fire reduced to glowing embers that cast a soft red light across the room. The air carried the faint sweetness of last night's brandy, the strong bite of Holmes's tobacco still lingering in the curtains, and the clean, warm scent of fresh ink on the page. Outside, the rain had stopped. Only the distant clop of an early hansom and the low chime of Big Ben, marking 4 o'clock, broke the silence. Holmes stood before the hearth, hands clasped behind his back, eyes bright with the peculiar light that signals the end of the hunt. "The hour has come, Watson. We gather the suspects here. The chain will be laid link by link before them all." By 8 o'clock, the sitting room held an unusual assembly. Inspector Lestrade stood near the door, bowler in hand. Elias Thorne sat nervously on the edge of a chair, fingers twisting a handkerchief. Isabella Moreau, pale, composed now, occupied the sofa, black velvet cloak folded beside her. A fourth figure had been summoned from Scotland Yard's cells. Jonas Pike, the lighterman, wrists lightly bound, face sullen. And finally, entering last under Lestrade's escort, came the hooded watcher, Mr. Harold Finch, former foreman at the Limehouse Powder Works, now a shadowy fixer for nitrate smugglers. His coat was damp. The tar smell clung to him. Holmes waited until all were seated, then began, voice calm and measured. "Gentlemen and lady, the complete chain lies before us. Is every link accounted for? I shall forge them one by one." He stepped to the table and lifted the first evidence packet. Physical evidence links. First, the greenish mud on Sir Reginald's boots. Carbolic, chalk, gunpowder residue. Found only at the abandoned Limehouse sheds, site of the 1882 explosion. Second, the brass button with crossed rifles and K, dropped on the embankment, matching Kovalenko's regiment and his coat. Third, tar-stained wool fibres in both throats. Sir Reginald's and Kovalenko's, identical to Pike's barge ropes and Finch's working coat. Fourth, the velvet scrap, torn from Mademoiselle Moreau's cloak in Kovalenko's hand. Fifth, the sodden overcoat in the river, initials R.B., containing the damning telegram fragment. He paused, letting the fire crackle fill the silence. Timeline links. Sir Reginald receives a telegram at 4. Warehouse. Midnight. Do not fail. Sent from Thorne's office at 7:30 on his instruction, but intercepted and altered by Finch. He meets Kovalenko at Limehouse, 7:30. Voices raised. He leaves alive. Arrives embankment, 8:45. Argues with Pike, who was paid by Finch to watch. Struggle ensues. Finch, waiting in shadows, strikes from behind with a hooked marlin spike, tears the throat to simulate beast attack, cleans blood, discards coat. Kovalenko dies the same way 2 nights later, same tool, same method, because he knew too much about the 1882 sabotage. Thorne gasped. Isabella's hand rose to her mouth. Witness links. Old Jem Crouch hears 2 voices at Limehouse, one Reginald's, one angry. Then Jonas Pike claims to see the murder from his barge. But his timing mismatches the wound angle. Isabella sees a hooded figure after she flees Kovalenko's warehouse. Harold Finch was that figure, known to use hooded coats when moving contraband. Finch shifted. Lestrade's hand moved to his truncheon. Motive links. The 1882 Limehouse explosion. Faulty nitrates, financed by Blackwood's bank, sabotaged by Finch to ruin Kovalenko and profit from insurance. 12 dead. Kovalenko lost fingers and livelihood, swore revenge. Blackwood paid commissions quietly. When Kovalenko pressed for repayment years later, Blackwood panicked, threatened exposure of the sabotage. Finch, still profiting from nitrates, could not allow old secrets to surface. He used Kovalenko's anger, Isabella's love, Thorne's fear. He staged both deaths as ghoul attacks to deflect suspicion. Holmes turned to Finch. Final connecting link. The marlin spike. Found this morning, hidden in your barge locker. Blood traces, matching both victims, hooked end matching wound edges. You kept it. Fatal vanity. The ground at Limehouse, the stones of the embankment, the timbers of your barge, all remembered. Finch surged to his feet. Lies, I only... Lestrade stepped forward. Harold Finch, I arrest you for the murders of Sir Reginald Blackwood and Victor Kovalenko. The man sagged. Thorne buried his face in his hands. Isabella wept quietly. Holmes stood motionless, eyes gleaming. Every link accounted for, he said softly. The chain complete. I watched the room empty. Finch led away in irons, Lestrade following with quiet satisfaction, Thorne stammering apologies. In Isabella rising with quiet dignity to thank Holmes before departing. The fire crackled low, the scent of tobacco faded as Holmes refilled his pipe from the Persian slipper. Looking back, the chain had been forming since that first patch of mud. Watson missed how the explosion's shadow bound them all. Did you see each link fall into place before Holmes laid them out? Before the marlin spike was named, what final connection did you forge? Holmes drew on his pipe, smoke curling upward in the quiet room. Every link accounted for, he repeated, almost to himself. The chain complete. Chapter 8. Justice in Chains. I record these concluding scenes from the afternoon following the revelations at 221B Baker Street, when the pale winter sun finally broke through the lingering clouds and cast long, watery shadows across the city. In the sitting room still held the faint echo of that morning's tension. The scent of strong tobacco smoke hung in the curtains, mingled with the clean sharpness of carbolic from Lestrade's coat and the warm leather of the chairs. Holmes had returned to his violin after the gathering dispersed, drawing slow, thoughtful notes from the Stradivarius that seemed to settle the very air. By 2 o'clock, we were summoned to Scotland Yard. Lestrade met us at the entrance, his face less harried than usual, though the lines around his eyes spoke of a sleepless night. The corridors smelled of polished wood, old paper files, and the ever-present coal smoke drifting up from the basement furnaces. We descended to the holding cells, where Harold Finch sat on a narrow bench behind iron bars, head bowed, hands manacled. His tar-stained coat had been taken. He wore only a rough shirt now, sleeves rolled to reveal old burn scars from the 1882 explosion. Lestrade unlocked the cell door with a heavy clank. Finch looked up slowly. His eyes were dull, defeated. "You've come to gloat, Holmes?" he asked, voice hoarse. Holmes stood just inside the threshold, hands clasped behind his back. "I have come to hear the truth spoken aloud, Mr. Finch. For the record." Finch laughed once, a dry, bitter sound. "Truth? You already have it. The marlinspike, the button, the mud, every damned link you forged." He leaned forward, chains rattling softly. "Blackwood deserved it. He knew the powder was rotten, knew children would die in that blast. Took his cut anyway. Kovalenko came sniffing years later, demanding blood money. I paid him silence for a time. But when Blackwood threatened to talk, to save his own skin, I acted." He paused, staring at the cold stone floor. "I used his own method. Made it look like a beast. Drained the blood into the river, easy enough with a bucket, cleaned the stones. Same for the pole. He knew too much. Would have talked, eventually." Isabella Moreau had been brought in quietly. She stood now in the corridor, flanked by a matron, listening without expression. Thorne waited upstairs, too shaken to descend. Lestrade nodded to the constable. The confession was noted in shorthand. Finch lifted his scarred hands. "They kept the spike. Stupid. Thought it safe in the barge. The river should have taken it." Holmes spoke softly. "The river remembers, Mr. Finch, as does the ground. You forgot that simple truth." Finch sagged back against the wall. "Hang me quick, then. I've no more to say." We left the cells. Upstairs in Lestrade's office, the inspector poured 3 small glasses of brandy from a bottle kept for such occasions. The liquid burned sweetly on the tongue, chasing the chill of the basement. "Clean case, Holmes," Lestrade said, raising his glass. "Finch will hang. Blackwood's name cleared of any supernatural nonsense. The papers will call it the Limehouse Revenge by tomorrow." Holmes inclined his head. "And the loose ends?" "Thorne's complicity. Minor. He'll lose his partnership, pay a fine, but no prison. Isabella Moreau, self-defense in Kovalenko's death, or close enough. She'll be released with a caution. The Yard owes you both a debt." I felt the rough wool of the office chair against my back, the warmth of the brandy spreading through my chest. Outside the window, hansom cabs splashed past. Gas lamps were already being lit against the early dusk. We returned to Baker Street as evening settled. Mrs. Hudson had prepared a simple supper. Hot soup, smelling of carrots, beef, and fresh bread. The fire burned high again. The room felt safe, familiar, the chemical apparatus gleaming softly under the gaslight. Holmes sat in his armchair, legs stretched toward the hearth, pipe drawing steadily. Justice served, Watson. Finch bound by his own chain. The ghoul of the Thames embankment was only a shadow cast by greed and old blood. I settled opposite him, the leather creaking comfortably. The clock ticked. Rain began again, gentle now, tapping the panes like a lullaby. Looking back, the arrest had been quiet. No dramatic struggle, only the slow closing of iron doors. Watson had expected more fire. Instead came confession and resignation. Did you foresee Finch's collapse when the marlinspike was named, or did the weight of past sins surprise you, as it did him? Holmes drew on his pipe once more, smoke rising in slow spirals. The violin rested nearby. He had not touched it since morning. "Loose ends tied," he murmured. "The criminal bound. Justice served." Chapter 9. Links restored. I write these closing reflections from the calm of a late February morning in 1896 at 221 in B. Baker Street, when the fog had finally lifted after weeks of clinging grey, allowing weak sunlight to slant across the carpet and warm the worn leather of our chairs. The coal fire burned low and steady. The air carried the comforting sense of fresh-baked bread from Mrs. Hudson's kitchen below, the faint sweetness of pipe tobacco Holmes had smoked the night before, and the clean, inky sharpness of the morning newspapers spread on the table. Outside, the city stirred slowly. Hansom wheels clattered on drying cobblestones, distant vendors called their wares, and Big Ben struck 10 with a clear, unhurried chime. The legal proceedings had concluded the previous week at the Old Bailey. Harold Finch's trial was brief. The evidence, marlinspike with blood traces, confession in the cells, the chain of physical links Holmes had forged, left no room for doubt. The judge, in sombre black robes, pronounced sentence: death by hanging. Finch accepted it without protest, head bowed, as the black cap was prepared. The courtroom smelled of polished oak, old wax, and the nervous sweat of spectators. I sat in the gallery beside Holmes, who watched in silence, face impassive. And Sir Reginald Blackwood's name was cleared of any scandal. The bank's directors issued a quiet statement. The late financier had been the victim of extortion rooted in an old industrial tragedy, not a participant in wrongdoing. His widow received the full insurance settlement. The children's future remained secure. Thorne, the junior partner, escaped prison, his role limited to unwitting complicity in the altered telegram. He paid a heavy fine, resigned his position, and retreated to a small house in Kent to rebuild what remained of his reputation. I saw him once more, thin and subdued, thanking Holmes on the courthouse steps with a trembling handshake. Isabella Moreau's fate was gentler still. The coroner's inquest into Victor Kovalenko's death returned a verdict of justifiable homicide in the course of a struggle. Her testimony, of love betrayed, of pleading, turned to panic, was accepted. She was bound over to keep the peace for 12 months. No more. Released from custody, she sold her theatrical costumes, packed her few belongings into a single trunk, and took passage on a steamer bound for Calais. Before departing, she called at Baker Street one rainy afternoon. She stood in the doorway, dark hair pinned neatly, black velvet cloak mended at the shoulder. "I leave England with no illusions," she said softly, accent still lilting. "But I leave with gratitude. You saw what others did not, that I struck in fear, not murder." Holmes inclined his head. "The chain distinguished truth from passion, mademoiselle. Safe voyage." She pressed a small envelope into my hand, a simple card with her brother's old Warsaw address. If ever you're in France, a quiet cafe in Paris awaits 2 gentlemen of reason." She departed down the 17 steps. The door closed softly behind her. I watched from the window as her figure vanished into the mist, carrying the weight of past sins, lifted at last. London began to forget the ghoul of the Thames embankment. The papers moved on to fresher sensations, political scandals, colonial dispatches, the latest music hall review. The embankment resumed its nightly procession of clerks and lovers. Cleopatra's Needle stood silent under gaslight once more. The greenish mud at Limehouse was slowly covered by new construction, foundations for warehouses that would never again store faulty powder. The river flowed on, washing away stains, both visible and invisible. At Baker Street, life returned to its familiar rhythm. Mrs. Hudson resumed her gentle scolding about untidy papers and cold pipes. Holmes took up his violin more often, playing slow, meditative airs that drifted through the rooms like smoke. I resumed my medical rounds, though I found myself glancing at boot soles and coat buttons with new attention. The chemical apparatus on the table gathered a thin layer of dust. The Persian slipper remained full. One quiet evening, as we sat by the fire, Holmes spoke without looking up from his newspaper. "Order is fragile, Watson. One weak link in society's chain, a greedy banker, a vengeful exile, a bitter foreman, and the whole may unravel. Yet logic, patiently applied, restores it. Finch's chain bound him. Ours set the innocent free." I nodded, feeling the warmth of the coals on my face. The room smelled of hot tea, sweet brandy poured in small measures, and the faint, damp newspaper Holmes had just discarded. Looking back, the restoration felt almost gentle after so much darkness. Watson had feared lasting shadows. Instead came quiet mending. Did you notice how each innocent party, Thorne, Isabella, found a path forward once the true chain closed around Finch? What final link restored balance in your mind? The clock ticked steadily. Outside, a lone foghorn sounded far off, softer now, almost peaceful. "Order restored to London's streets," Holmes murmured, turning a page. Chapter 10. By the fire at Baker Street, I set down these final words on a quiet evening in early March 1896, seated in my usual armchair at 221B Baker Street. The coal fire burned with a steady, comforting glow, casting warm orange light across the familiar clutter. Chemical apparatus, neatly pushed aside for once, and the Stradivarius resting in its open case, the Persian slipper still half full of strong tobacco. Outside, a light spring rain pattered against the window panes. Inside, the room smelled of hot tea laced with bergamot, the faint sweetness of brandy in 2 small glasses, and the rich aromatic smoke curling from Holmes's pipe. The 17 steps from the street had echoed softly when Mrs. Hudson brought up the tray an hour ago. Now only the gentle crackle of coals and the distant chime of Big Ben marked the passing time. Holmes sat opposite me, legs stretched toward the hearth, pipe in hand. He had been unusually still for the past half hour, eyes half closed, as though reviewing the entire case in silent review. At length he spoke, voice low and reflective. "The newspapers have moved on, Watson. Ghoul of the Thames Embankment, reduced to a single paragraph in the weeklies. Finch hanged last Tuesday at Newgate. Quietly, without spectacle. Isabella Moreau writes from Paris. A small theatre, modest roles, peace at last. Thorne tends roses in Kent. London forgets quickly when order returns." I nodded, feeling the warm leather of the chair against my back. And yet, the chain remains in my mind. Every link, mud, button, fibres, telegram, velvet, marlinspike, forged so precisely. Holmes drew on his pipe, smoke rising in slow spirals. "That is the method, Watson. Observation is the raw ore, logic the hammer and anvil, each clue a link, each deduction the forge that connects it. One patch of greenish mud on a banker's boot seemed trivial, until linked to Limehouse, to gunpowder residue, to an explosion 13 years past. And that single link pulled the next. Military button, tarred wool, a Pole's revenge, then the woman's velvet, the foreman's hooded shadow. Link by link, the impossible became inevitable." He paused, eyes gleaming in the firelight. "Recall the case of the speckled band. A whistle in the night, a bell rope that was no bell rope, a saucer of milk, disjointed fragments until the chain formed. Stepfather, trained snake, greed for inheritance, or the red-headed league. Red hair, absurd job, clay on boots, each observation meaningless alone, together unbreakable. Here, too, the science of deduction prevailed. Deception relies on distraction. The ghoul myth, the drained blood, the savage wound. But the ground remembers footsteps, cloth remembers tears, metal remembers fingerprints of intent. When you eliminate the impossible, the supernatural beast, the random madman, what remains, however improbable, is truth." I sipped my tea, its warmth spreading through my chest. "You saw 3 links where I saw only mud. then 5, then 10. How do you train the mind to forge them so swiftly? Holmes smiled faintly, the rare, genuine one, reserved for such moments. Practice, Watson, and a relentless curiosity. The world bombards us with data. Most discard it as noise. I collect it, sort it, test it. When patterns emerge, I forge. The chain is never complete until every link is tested. Weak ones shatter, strong ones hold. Finch's vanity kept the marlinspike. That final link bound him. He set the pipe aside, steepled his fingers under his chin. Why does observation defeat deception? Because men lie, but things do not. Boots carry soil from places they should not have been. Coats retain fibers from struggles they should not have witnessed. Telegrams burn, but ash remembers words. The criminal forgets that the material world is a silent witness, impartial, patient, unforgiving. Deduction is merely listening to that witness when others will not. The fire crackled softly. Rain tapped a gentle rhythm on the glass. Holmes rose, paced once before the hearth, then returned to his chair. In the end, the chain method is simple. Observe minutely, connect logically, test ruthlessly, conclude fearlessly. It is not magic. It is science applied to human frailty, and it works because truth, once forged, cannot be broken. I looked across at my friend, his profile sharp against the firelight. Until the next chain forges, then. Holmes lifted his glass in a small toast. Indeed, the game continues. The clock ticked on. Mrs. Hudson's footsteps faded down the stairs. Outside, a lone hansom splashed past. Inside, peace settled like the warmth of the coals. I closed my notebook, feeling the smooth leather cover under my palm. Looking back over these pages, the chain had begun with a single observation in the fog and ended here by the fire, with order restored. Watson learned, as always, to see a little more clearly. Did you, dear listener, follow each link as it formed? Did you forge any before Holmes named them? The rain eased, the fire burned lower, until the next chain forges. Dear listener, the game continues.